Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan Clifford, and I'm here today to talk about launching an alpha API platform at speed. So just to introduce myself, I've worked on many different developer platforms and API platforms, primarily within finance, fintech, payments, and it's been really interesting working at different companies to see the different perspectives and trying to aggregate kind of those learnings each time I moved from one company to the next. And today, I'm going to try and talk a bit more about what we've done at Spendesk. But to ground it, I'm going to start with kind of what my experience has taught me over the last kind of 3 previous dev platforms, is that they probably take about 2 to 3 years to really start showing any value. And there's a lot of wasted time. I could probably account 1 year of that time just spent on talking about strategy, debating it, playing with egos sometimes, to then decide what to do. So when I came to Spendesk, which was earlier this year, I went to our C-suite and said, that's what I usually see. What I want is, in 9 months, I want to see the value that would typically take 2 to 3 years. Now, to do that, you need to have a bit of trust, and we're going to try and do some things differently. So big question is how we're going to do that. And the first step was we're going to launch a public alpha API. We're not going to do this quietly, privately. We're actually going to do it publicly and show value as quick as we can. So to start off that, I'm going to talk about the building blocks of a platform. In the context of platform for my realm, it's external platforms, so APIs and integrations. And the way I start to think about it is first you have your core product or your core capabilities. And the next ring is looking at how do you expose those core capabilities via APIs. It could be looking at webhook solutions. It could be looking at file-based solutions as well. But also looking at how do you take your core product and integrate to a tool stack for your customers to then use seamlessly. And one side of this is looking at the developer experience. There's been different conversations around developer experience, developer success. The main thing I think about is it's not just a developer portal, it's that experience that a developer goes through when using a sandbox, getting support, trying out demos and tooling. And then there's lots more that can go into that space. And the other side is kind of what I kind of just bucket as product enhancement. So looking at how can you make your experience even better with SDKs. You might look at plugins. You might look at hosted solutions where there may be more low-code configurations. In payments, you've got hosted payment pages. I would class that as sort of a hosted solution. But this is what I'm kind of looking at when it comes to the whole platform. And today I'm going to focus on 2, looking at the APIs as products, which I know is a buzzword, but I do believe in it, and developer experience. So APIs as products. If I think about the different companies I've been in, the first question that usually get asked is, how do we actually design the APIs? And over many iterations, there's this design process that I use, which looks at, first of all, the stages of designing and how you can leverage guidelines, standards, look at reusable models in your organization, start to create API designs and open API specs using some good tools. Stoplight was here yesterday with Jason. We used them. And then looking at how do you start to get validating feedback and then start reviewing it with your teams to essentially have it approved as a good open API spec that, by the way, you haven't built yet, but you've designed, so then you can share with your consumers to start piloting and testing and building against it. Now, this took some time to build up, and in each of these buckets, you have kind of standards that sit beneath it. So here's kind of guidelines and standards where we would have a ton of documentation on what does it mean for each of these different things. Now, coming to Spendesk, we don't have all of this straight away. So what we did when it came to the alpha stage is something a little bit more simple to begin with, which first of all, focusing on the value that you can deliver. So going, where is our value for our APIs that we can expose quickly? And for us, it was looking at our spend data and just seeing how consumers can retrieve that data on our platform. That was where a lot of the value and use cases were being demanded. Then it was looking at starting to build that. So looking at, do we have any internal APIs? Do we have any data models we can look at exploring and exposing? And then thinking about how do we actually have consumers use this information if we expose it via an API. But the bit that really kind of solidified and added value was the design reviews. And this had to be both product and engineering. So it's so common that you might have someone say, it's an API, it's technical, it's a way to integrate, engineers can do that. And I actually had a product manager who kind of went, yeah, I think the engineers should be doing this. I don't know where my involvement is. And I said, no, you need to be involved because we need to think about holistically the experience of APIs. And this is where we kind of debated code first and design first. We started off a little bit more on code first, and that was because we didn't quite have the capacity to really look at the product yet and design the API, but we shifted to design first because we realized what we were doing by doing code first is we were just exposing the internal data model, and that's not the best experience. We actually need to start abstracting complexity and think, well, how would we want to consume this if I was external? Not how do I consume it because I know all of our internal systems. And then we could actually get some very early consumer feedback, and this was kind of pre a public alpha. So there was a step before where we started to talk to some friendly customers. But how do we then build the APIs? So I actually stole these slides from my engineering partner who used them yesterday, where he called out some of the tools that we use, which I always think is quite helpful. So the top row are really what the engineers are using to build our API, and the bottom set are the ones that a lot of the product managers are using to help design, document, test our APIs. And this is kind of a high level what it sort of looks like. A key message that my engineering partner Marco said yesterday is we're looking at how do we build alongside the current technology that we've got. We don't necessarily have to scrap everything and start again. Let's look at what we've got and enhance from there. So I want to shift gears to developer experience and talk about what can we see there, what would you want to do, and what did we do when it came to alpha. So there's many different frameworks out there. One that I like to use is splitting it into 4 areas, looking at the discovery piece where you want awareness, so your developer portal will be there in terms of a landing page with a catalog. You might do things that drive consumers to that page. You may do hackathons, events, etc. And then you've got the onboarding side of once I've landed on that site, understood enough of what your API does, I then want to try registering, getting some API keys, playing with a sandbox. In parallel, you're also then building, you're looking at documentation, tutorials, etc. And then the idea is that you get to production, and then you want to ongoingly manage this, monitor it, etc. But there are a couple things that cut across some of these areas where it's looking at how do you do testing scenarios in your sandbox and your documentation and your different dev tools. There's looking at what is the support that you offer across a lot of this journey. And then how does the developer community play a part in this? And if I'm honest, in all of my platforms that I've worked on, I've not cracked developer community to the great extent that you can do, but it's something that's is such a powerful driver if you get it right, and there are some platforms out there who have done it really well. But that's a lot to do, right? And I actually had this task of, we don't necessarily have all the people to build this yet because I need to show the value. So the question is, what do we do first? And this is what I would highlight of what we've done personally for Alpha. On here, we focused on having a landing site and our API catalog. We've looked at the registration flow, getting an API key, getting a sandbox, and by the way, some of these journeys may be manual to begin with alphas because you want to control how many people have access, and that's okay. Eventually, we will go fully self-served. Also, sandboxes don't have to be perfect at the very beginning. Let's get something out there and improve from there. Then having your documentation, so open API specs, so your API reference, but also some guide documentation. I'm not a fan of just having an open API spec and say, great, that's enough. Although it is a testimony, if your open API spec is so understandable and intuitive that you don't need documentation, that's definitely a goal to aim for. And then production, having some sort of monitoring, and then having support. The ones that are highlighted, these are the ones that we focused on for Alpha because we had to start somewhere. So what does our alpha actually look like? So I mentioned about our homepage, getting something out there which just is a landing page, is a Spendesk for developers, has our APIs on there, also calls out our integrations because many people get integrations and APIs kind of mixed up in terms of what they're after. But that was a good starting point. Also having documentation, so having things like guides or your API reference, very common things. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with them. This was easy to get up and running. But then it's looking at our go-to-market and how we approach it. So we actually we want an open waitlist, and we want to engage people with signing up, telling us what they want so we can prioritize our backlog, but then start engaging them first in alphas. Then this basically builds up our pipeline for beta and then for our general availability launch. So getting an open waitlist out there straight away. And then we actually speak about it. So we've been talking at conferences and doing customer events. We've got an alpha here. Although it is early stages, we can still talk about it. Let's not be afraid to do that. And then hype it internally. That is probably one of my biggest missions, is how do we get an organization used to APIs, and what do we do to do that? So there's education, so educating stakeholders, not just your C-suite, but all the way down. So the way we did it at Spendesk was we started with C-suite to get their buy-in, then we went down leadership teams, and then we went to the entire company. We also ran enablement sessions, trying to walk them through APIs, and we also have API champions across the organization, not just in business, but also in our product engineering user care teams. We then think about showing value. So we're in alpha, which is our Q4 kind of goal to really drive adoption and show value and make sure that we can get people testing out our API, forming some new partnerships, and then communicating it oftenly. So I think our organization is fed up with me talking about APIs because they've heard it a lot from me. And it will continue until I reach my end goal, which I will come to in a minute. You'll see what that is. And then acknowledging cross-functional teams. So this cannot be just a product and engineering thing. You need marketing, you need sales, you need legal, compliance. And actually, if you engage legal, security, and compliance proactively, they're not blockers. They're actually the easiest stakeholder I have is legal, security, and compliance out of that list. That doesn't happen very much. So essentially, this is what hyping should look like. Hopefully you get this reference. We've just added that to our internal Slack. If you use developers, Steve Ballmer comes up. And now I want to talk about showing the C-suite enough value in 9 months. What does that really look like? So if I think about it, we started off in July, which I'm calling month 0, with that bold statement of 9 months. And yes, there are Game of Thrones references coming. So we had our 3 dragon eggs. We've then, last month in September, had what I'm calling the birth of the Alpha API. Next step is we're going to mature our dragons into our beta program. And then we will go to global availability or general availability, where we'll start having more fully grown dragons. I hope you get Game of Thrones references. 2 disclaimers. One, in Q2, we did start laying some of the foundations, so it sort of ruins my 9 months plan, but 12 months is still good. And also thanks to HBO for the gifts. Now, I said around end goal, there actually is a lot more Game of Thrones gifts, and I have mapped out our journey all the way to the end of Season 8 with the destruction of King's Landing and exactly what that means. We're very creative and spinning good stories out of destruction of King's Landing. We can do that. But what happens after 9 months? When we go to general availability, that is not the end, and that's a key message that we're trying to land, is going, if we look at developer experience and APIs, we've launched kind of the beginning of our developer experience on our portal, and we've also been delivering our spend and accounting data APIs, and they will have to be continuously improved afterwards. They don't die as products, they continue. And then we'll do enhancements, and that will happen over time for our developer portal, our developer experience, our tooling, and then we will expand our capabilities into our other core capabilities that we have as a company. So it's to illustrate a point that this continues. And what that looks like, especially for the marketing people in terms of launches, is going, yes, we can have a big launch when we have enough value from our platform. But then as we start to expose new capabilities, we can do mini launches. And then for some of the dev experience stuff, it may not be a launch or a mini launch, it may be just an announcement. But this is just a nice way of getting some of the stakeholders in line with what does an API platform look like? How does it all come together? So, last slide, key takeaways is have a vision and strategy, be bold. That 9-month statement was a very bold one, but I think you need to set some sort of ambition and positive pressure to get people up and running and start to break down that vision into a strategy that is digestible. So having an alpha, beta, GA with kind of steps that get us towards a really good platform is a great way to make it digestible. Then show value quickly. I think if we didn't go to alpha so quickly with an ambitious date, and by the way that that date was set was I just picked September the 13th because I was speaking somewhere, and I said, let's see what we can get done by that date. Most other projects go, let's timeline this, let's figure out how long it will take to build all of this and then decide a date. I was like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to be ambitious, but in a different way. But make it a priority to all your cross-functional teams. And there's different ways you can do that. I did have to hound it a little bit to say, we should be doing this at alpha stage, like we should be marketing it, we should be doing X, Y, Z, we should go public. And eventually we got the right support. But the idea is I expect more support when we go into beta. And when we go into general availability, I'm expecting a lot more priorities from other cross-functional teams to help me do that with the rest of the platform team. And the last one is adapting. So something I've learned is you cannot just take playbooks and frameworks and throw them at platforms and expect them to work. The real skill in all of this, and I can share tons of different frameworks and strategies, but what you need is someone who can take those and adapt them to your context, to your organization. Because having seen 4 different platforms, yes, there are similarities, but they are different. So something that worked at a bank doesn't necessarily work at a fintech or in a payments company, and you have to learn to adapt. So I think that's my main thing is take these as inspiration, some of the frameworks, but really think about how does it work in my company, who are my stakeholders, how do I get them involved. So thank you, hopefully time's okay, and I'll join Q&A afterwards. Thank you for having me.